Welcome to Let's Clear the Air, a podcast sponsored by the Allergy, Asthma, and Sinus Center, dedicated to educating listeners about allergies, asthma, and immunology.
Welcome to this episode of Let's Clear the Air, all things allergy, asthma, and immunology. I'm your host for this episode, Marcella Feathers, and I am here again with Dr. Phil Jones at our Johnson City location. Hello, Dr. Jones.
Hey, Marcella. Great to see you again.
Great to see you as well. We appreciate you doing another episode with us. I always have a good time, and I'm sure our listeners appreciate your
Absolutely.
insights.
Glad to be here.
And we are coming up on the holidays.
Oh, yeah. Be here before you know it.
Yes, always. Always happens that way.
Yes.
And we were talking just a little bit before we started about holiday foods and food allergies that might be in.
All kinds of great food. This
Right.
time.
Yes, that's
Yes.
true. Let's hit on the positive. All kinds of great foods, home cooking, all of it, but also a little bit of unknown in what's being brought to the table during the holidays. But you were telling me something that's actually been newly defined or given a new title. Can you tell us just a little bit about what you and I were discussing?
Absolutely. Well, with the holidays, we eat differently, a lot of different things. We get together with a lot of other people, and they make dishes, and we don't always know what's in that. And for most of us, that's not a big deal. But for those of us with food allergy, that could be a really trying, risky time. And so I always tell patients, and particularly my tree nut allergic patients, fall, starting with Halloween through New Year's, is a particularly risky time because our diet changes. With the holidays, we drop our guard. We're not as diligent about reading labels, or you hate to be the person at the at the get together that is are there walnuts in this, and bring attention to yourself. But that particular season, now tree nut patients can have problems year round, but really, I really keep it. Want them to be very diligent and careful Halloween through New Year's.
And what classifies as a tree nut? What do they need to be looking out for?
Tree nut is interesting. Patients always ask, is coconut a tree nut? So to the FDA, a coconut is a tree nut. To a scientist, coconut is not a tree nut. Okay,
Is that more a fruit? What is that?
Yes. Yeah, it's a different family. So,
okay.
But the other ones would be like almonds, cashews, pistachios, hazelnuts, like Nutella, everybody's favorite, macadamia nut, those type of things. Those are the classic tree nuts.
All the good holiday.
Absolutely, yes. The one a lot of us only eat tree nuts through the holidays, kind of thing. So.
I'm thinking this might be a little old school, but I'm thinking of the big round tray that held all the variety of nuts with the cracker and everything.
Yes. If the listeners could see our gray hair, they would understand that. The younger listeners have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, that's true. Oh well, they can look it up. It's out there. I've seen it still.
Yeah.
So how does so first of all, some of our listeners may already have been tested. That's commonly tested on our food allergy panel, right? Tree nuts? Yeah,
so in general, Marcella, when I approach a patient who presents with a possible food allergy, okay, and a classic presentation of a food allergy would be, I ate a particular food, and within minutes to an hour, I developed symptoms. And typical symptoms of a food allergy would be things like hives or urticaria, or some people call them welts. And here in East Tennessee, sometimes we call them blisters, though technically they're not a blister. Or angioedema, my lips swelled, or my tongue swelled, or I felt like my throat was swelling. Patients can have respiratory symptoms, tightness, wheezing, shortness of breath, and they can even have cardiovascular symptoms, a drop in blood pressure. So they may get lightheaded, dizzy, lethargic type symptoms. And when you have more than one of those systems involved, we call it anaphylaxis, which is a potentially life-threatening food reaction. There are less severe food reactions. For example, since we were talking about tree nuts, some people who are very allergic to pollen, their immune system, when they eat certain tree nuts, can't tell the two apart, and they'll have a reaction. But it tends to be limited to the mouth and throat. So it's kind of a burning, itching, not all those other symptoms, okay? So it kind of gets a little convoluted in sorting food allergy and pollen food apart.
And that's what we were talking about. The term that you had introduced to me that I had not heard was pollen-food allergy syndrome.
Yeah, so we see that a lot. Patients are either food aversion in our kids; they're they don't want to eat the tree nuts, or in adults they'll come to us with possible food allergy, but their symptom will only be, hey, when I eat a particular nut, a walnut or hazelnut, my mouth is itchy and my throat's itchy. But again, none of those systemic symptoms. And really, well, I hate to say in a nutshell, but in a nutshell, that's really
a theme.
It is that the immune system can't tell the difference in the pollen, usually birch pollen, by the way, and that particular nut. And so it's to the immune system, it's I'm eating birch pollen, and so you get an itchy mouth and throat. It's a nuisance. We still want you to avoid that, but it's extremely rare it's any more severe than that. So treatment is usually avoidance. I tell patients it's more of a nuisance versus true nut allergic patients. Boy, that's potentially life-threatening and usually lifelong too.
So when you do a food allergy test or just an allergy test in general, you probably are looking, okay, you may not have a nut allergy per se, but we see a tree pollen allergy. So you might be on the lookout for certain, not really, you wouldn't call it cross-reactivity, would you?
Yeah, it's kind of cross-reactivity. The immune system, again, that protein sequence, which is conserved in a lot of things throughout nature, it recognizes it, kind of thing. When we're talking about diagnosing, we now have some tools that help us look into that a little better than we used to. When I first started doing this, we had skin tests, which are very good. My favorite way to diagnose a tree nut allergy. But in the old days, we had RAS test and IgE to whatever nut you wanted. But nowadays, we have immunoassays, but also component testing. And so by looking at different components that the patient may be allergic to, I can look at that component and say, this is a pollen-food patient versus another component's positive that we see more commonly with allergic reactions and anaphylaxis. So blood work has become an integral part of taking care of food allergies, which is a big change from where I started. It was really just skin test, and that was it. Now they're very complementary of each other, and we use both in many situations to better risk stratify the patient and to give them a much better idea, is it pollen food or is it true tree nut allergy, which of course always has the risk of more severe type reactions.
So what are the pollen trees that could cause this type of
Birch
reaction?
pollen is the biggest one that does that, and we see that very commonly. Again, hazelnut, peanuts, even though we're talking about tree nuts, can do that. Walnut would be another one. So that's very common to see that.
Okay. And so patients would come in with you, or come in and say, I've had this kind of symptom, or I've had this type of reaction when I've eaten this certain food. You would perform the test that you were just describing. And then avoidance. But what happens if, with the holidays and with just, here, try this, somebody coming up with something tasty looking that doesn't even look like it has any type of nuts in it?
Absolutely. So I think that's what an allergist does a very good job of, is identifying what you're allergic to, but also helping with assistance with avoidance measures. And then what's my plan when I have an accidental exposure and have symptoms, kind of things. And even allergists with tree nut allergy get fooled sometimes, okay? So it's just, even the most diligent family, even the most diligent patient, whether it's the holidays and we drop our guard, or we're traveling on vacation and you drop your guard, we need to be prepared for that exposure and then what happens, okay? We don't have a cure for tree nut allergy as we speak today. Lots of ongoing research and treatment of food allergies and those type things. But as we speak today, there's again, lots of research and a much better outlook for food allergic patients than when I started doing this. But again, the plan now is still avoidance and preparedness. All patients with tree nut allergy should carry an epi-pen and be well versed. I said epi-pen, but there's AviQ, Adrenaclick, Neffy is out there, a new intranasal form of epinephrine. So there's a lot of options for those patients. But epinephrine is the perfect antidote for these type reactions, particularly when there's respiratory or cardiovascular compromise in those patients. And I always tell patients who I give an epi-pen, I always like to tell them, there's three things that go wrong in food allergic patients. One, they didn't have it or didn't have it with them, and that happens more than it should. Two, they had it and they chose not to use it. There's just this fear of using epinephrine, and I always tell patients, it's adrenaline. It's like someone jumped out and scared you. Your heart beats strong, it pounds, but your blood pressure comes up, and that's one way it's life-saving. And it dilates the airway, another way. And a big way it saves a life, there's a lot of volume shifts of fluid outside the blood vessel into the tissue, which contributes to the drop in blood pressure. It brings that fluid back into the blood vessel. So there's many ways it saves lives. So one, they didn't have it. Two, they had it and chose not to use it. And I can picture in my mind now so many patients I've sat down with, and they always start this conversation the same way. I'm sorry, Dr. Jones, I didn't do what you told me to do. And so we go through that. And lastly, they wait too long to use it. Anaphylaxis builds up momentum. So the longer you wait to take your epinephrine in the appropriate situation, the harder it is to reverse that reaction.
If your reactions maybe aren't to the point where you're experiencing the anaphylaxis or the drop in blood pressure or chest pains or difficulty breathing, all of those symptoms, what's wise to do? Should you do anything, or should you just be, I don't know, drink a lot of water?
So yeah, that's a great question. So I'll tell them, if you have an exposure and it is limited to the skin, so maybe it's a few hives, maybe my lip has swelled a little bit, maybe my eyelid has swollen, but that's it. No, my tongue is good, I can swallow, my voice is good, my breathing's good, there's no tightness, wheezing, I'm not lightheaded, dizzy, those kind of things. I can take Benadryl for that. But I tell them, if it's anything, if it's base of my tongue, I'm having trouble swallowing, I feel that I need to drool rather than swallow secretions, my voice is hoarse, that's epinephrine. Chest, of course, my patients it's very easy for them to understand why shortness of breath, tightness, wheezing, lightheadedness is epinephrine. But I think when we get these laryngeal symptoms, base of the tongue, drooling, voice changes, trouble swallowing, that really is epinephrine, not Benadryl.
Okay.
And if I tell them, if you're in doubt, take it. If mom's instinct says give it to the child, give it. And I always tell them, if you think about calling me, the first thing you do is take your Epi-pen and then call me.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
Better safe than sorry,
Absolutely.
right? Oh, you brought up Neffy, which I had just seen a couple of articles about recently. What do you think about that? Can you describe how that's different or what that is now from the epi-pen?
All of our epinephrine to this date has been either worst case scenario, you draw it up in a vial and inject it, versus auto injectors, and there's a good number of those, all very good products. And I apologize for saying epi-pen, 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 but that's the one that's been with me for the last 20-some years, so It's just everything's epi-pen to me, though they're equally good products out there. Neffy is the first intranasal form of epinephrine, and from some of the pharmacologic studies, it may even be the best way to administer epinephrine. All right. If we look at effect on systolic blood pressure, but also diastolic blood pressure. Plus, there's a lot of people who are just afraid of needles. And this is needleless, okay? Now, we don't have an indication down into kids yet. That will come, but that'll be a great option for them. So, yes, another wonderful tool in our armamentarium to treat anaphylaxis with.
And it's a nose spray, so you just simply spray it in each nostril and it gets absorbed through the...
It's one spray on one nostril.
Oh.
A little bit different technique than we do with our intranasal steroids or intranasal antihistamines, but we, of course, would demonstrate that to the patient. And then, just like you carry 2 EpiPens or 2 Auvi-Qs or 2 adrenal clicks, you have 2 Neffys. And so if your symptoms, you take your first dose and your symptoms are progressing, or they go away and they come back, which is an unusual, what we call biphasic reaction, you have that second dose. And it's recommended that you administer that next spray in the same nostril. Okay. I suspect that's just the way it was done in studies, why we do that, rather than for some pharmacologic perspective, though.
And if there's someone out there who's interested in that, they can just talk to you or their allergist about getting that prescribed?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Nice.
Yes.
So it is covered by most insurance?
Like any new drug, it takes a while to to get coverage and those type things. But I suspect it will take off. I suspect it will become a more probably the most popular version of an epinephrine replacement product, not only because it's needless, but because of its pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics effects.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good news going into the holidays.
Yes. As your Christmas present. No more needles.
Lots of folks out there will like that. I'm
absolutely.
Sure. All right. Well, we appreciate you taking this time, and we wish everyone out there a happy holiday and a blessed new year as we go into the new year. And we appreciate you guys listening. If you have any suggestions for any topics or anything you would like to hear on the podcast, please reach out and let us know. Thank you, Dr. Jones.
Thank you. Merry Christmas, everybody. Enjoyed it.
Merry Christmas.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Let's Clear the Air. Please consider following this podcast, and remember, if you want helpful and accurate information about allergies and asthma, our allergy experts are here to clear the air.